Jack Miller didn't remember stopping the truck, or the blow that sent the forest into darkness. When he opened his eyes, blood ran down his neck, and rope burned into his wrists. He was inside his own truck, hands tied, body pinned. Someone was sitting beside him, not a stranger, but a man shaped by years of war. "Don't panic," the veteran whispered. "Don't make a sound. They're still out there." In the back seat, a German shepherd stood frozen, ears forward, muscles locked. The dog wasn't afraid. He was warning them. Jack's heart pounded. Why was he tied up? A hand covered his mouth. "If you speak," the veteran whispered, "we both die. They think you're already dead." Outside the glass, shadows moved, slow, searching. The next 60 seconds would decide everything. Before we begin, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Cold fog pressed low against the forest road, swallowing sound and distance, turning the night into a narrow tunnel of damp air, pine resin, and unseen movement. Jack Miller woke in pain. It wasn't a sharp pain at first, but a spreading pressure at the base of his skull, pulsing slowly, insistently, like a warning bell that refused to stop. The inside of the truck felt smaller than it should have been, metal pressing in from all sides, the cold of it seeping through his jacket and into his bones. The smell hit him next, oil, wet wood, and the sour tang of old blood. When he opened his eyes, the world swam, blurred by fogged glass and the haze of a mind dragged back too quickly from darkness. His hands were bound behind him. Thick rope bit into his wrists, coarse fibers scraping raw skin with every breath he took. Jack tested the tension once, carefully, then stopped. Pain sharpened, confirming what his body already knew. He was restrained, injured, and not alone. The part of him, shaped by years in the teams, the part that never fully shut down, slid into place without asking permission. Assess, breathe, stay still. Jack Miller was 42, broad-shouldered even now, though time had carved lines into his face that no mirror ever fully explained. His hair, once dark, had faded into a rough mix of brown and gray, kept short out of habit rather than regulation. A scar cut through his right eyebrow, an old souvenir from a mission he never spoke about. He had left the Navy SEALs 2 years earlier, but the quiet hadn't followed him the way he had hoped. It never did. It waited. And then it came back like this. He tried to remember how he'd ended up here. The memory stalled at the same place every time. A narrow forest road, fog crawling across the headlights, and a feeling, subtle but undeniable, that he should have turned around. Jack had ignored it. He always did. He drew in a breath to speak. A hand clamped firmly over his mouth. It wasn't frantic. It didn't shake. The grip was steady, practiced, the kind that knew exactly how much pressure to use. A voice followed, low and rough, pressed close to his ear. "Don't make a sound. If you do, you won't get another chance." Jack's heart surged, but panic never took hold. He didn't fight, didn't jerk away. Instead, he let his eyes shift, slow and controlled, toward the man beside him. The stranger sat rigidly in the passenger seat, angled slightly forward as if ready to move at any second. He was older than Jack by at least a decade, lean rather than broad, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years spent outdoors and longer years spent carrying things that didn't lighten with time. His beard was streaked with gray, trimmed short but uneven, and his eyes, sharp, watchful, pale under heavy brows, never stopped scanning the fogged windshield. Mud clung to his jacket, along with flecks of pine sap, and his boots were scuffed in a way that suggested distance, not carelessness. This wasn't the man who had attacked him. Before Jack could form another thought, a sound rolled through the cab from behind them, low, controlled, a deep vibration that seemed to rise from the chest rather than the throat. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. Jack glanced toward the rearview mirror. A German shepherd stood on the back seat, muscles locked tight beneath a thick sable coat. The dog was large, older but powerful, with a graying muzzle that hinted at years of work rather than age alone. His ears were pinned forward, eyes fixed on something beyond the truck, unblinking. There was no fear in him, only focus, the kind that came from training layered over instinct, sharpened by experience. The man leaned closer, his hand still covering Jack's mouth. "They're still out there," he whispered, "and they think you're finished." Outside the truck, the forest shifted. A branch moved where there was no wind. Fog curled around the trees like Something alive, muffling distance and hiding intent. Jack felt the silence settle into his chest, heavy and deliberate. This wasn't peace. It was the space predators left before they returned. Jack swallowed slowly, his pulse hammering, and for the first time since waking, he understood exactly what the quiet meant. This wasn't the end of the night. It was the pause before death decided whether to come back. Tom Walker slowly removed his hand from Jack's mouth, but the tension in his posture never eased. He remained angled toward the windshield, shoulders slightly hunched, like a man who had learned the hard way that stillness could be more dangerous than movement. In the dim glow filtering through the fogged glass, Jack studied him more carefully. Tom was in his late 50s, tall but lean, his frame wiry rather than bulky, shaped by years of physical labor and military discipline. His face carried deep lines carved by sun and sleepless nights, and his eyes, gray and sharp, held a guarded patience that came from surviving things that never made it into official reports. "I'm Tom Walker," he said quietly, "former Army, infantry." Jack nodded once. "Jack Miller, Navy SEAL." Tom's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I figured you don't wake up like a civilian." Behind them, the German Shepherd shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Tom raised 2 fingers, without turning his head. The dog froze instantly. Jack had worked with canine units before, but the precision here struck him. This wasn't just training, it was trust forged over years. "That's Rex," Tom said. "He's 10, retired, officially, but he never learned how to quit." Rex was a large male shepherd, his sable coat dark along the spine and lighter around the flanks, streaked with gray at the muzzle. One ear bore a small notch, old and healed. His eyes were amber and alert, not frantic, not aggressive, measuring. He stood with his paws planted wide for balance, a posture that suggested endurance more than speed. Jack swallowed. "What happened to me?" "You walked into a trap," Tom replied. "One you weren't meant to walk out of." Rex let out a low growl, brief and controlled. Tom leaned closer to Jack, his voice barely carrying above breath. "Movement, right side, still about 30 meters. Slow, careful." Jack resisted the urge to turn his head. Years of training kicked in again, steadying his pulse. "How long have you been tracking them?" "Long enough to know they don't rush," Tom said, "and long enough to know they don't leave witnesses." The fog outside thickened, muffling the forest until it felt like the world had shrunk to the size of the truck cab. Tom spoke in short, deliberate sentences, as if every word had weight. He explained that for weeks he and Rex had followed a pattern: abandoned vehicles, unreported disappearances, roads that cut too cleanly through the woods. The men behind it all were former soldiers, men who understood terrain, silence, and how to erase themselves. "They move people," Tom said, "across state lines, off the grid. Anyone who gets too close either vanishes or ends up looking like an accident." Jack's jaw tightened. "And you?" Tom's eyes flickered, just for a moment. "They took my niece, Sarah." It was the first new name spoken aloud. Sarah Walker had been 24, Tom explained. Slender and tall, with long auburn hair she usually kept braided over one shoulder. Her skin was pale and freckled from years spent hiking and working outdoor gyms, and she had a habit of smiling even when she was nervous. She trusted people too easily. That was what broke Tom's voice when he said it. She'd been driving home from a late shift, vanished on a forest road not unlike this one. No witnesses, no body, just a cold silence where answers should have been. Rex lowered his head slightly, as if sensing the shift in Tom's emotions. Jack felt something heavy settle in his chest. "That's why you didn't call this in," he said quietly. Tom nodded. "I tried. Doors closed, files moved. People stopped returning calls, so I stopped asking." Another branch snapped outside, closer this time. Rex's ears flicked forward, his body tightening again. Tom's hand hovered near his belt, where a compact knife rested. "They're circling," he murmured. "Checking." Jack exhaled slowly. "They think I'm already dead." "That's the only reason you're breathing," Tom said. "Rex caught their scent before they finished the job. Gave me just enough time to pull you back into the truck and make it look right." Jack flexed his fingers against the rope binding his wrists. Pain flared, but beneath it was clarity. "You tied me." Tom met his eyes. "If you'd woken up screaming, we'd both be gone." Rex's growl deepened, vibrating through the cab. Tom stiffened. "They're closer now." Jack felt the weight of the truth settle in. He hadn't survived by chance. He'd survived because two damaged survivors, one man and one dog, had refused to step away. The forest fell silent again, too silent. Tom whispered, "Whatever happens next, you follow Rex. Not me, him." Jack nodded once. He didn't argue. He understood instinct when he saw it. Outside, footsteps paused. The waiting was over. Tom spoke the way men did when they had learned that words could get you killed if you used too many of them. Short, clean, measured. His eyes never stopped moving as he talked, tracking the fog beyond the windshield, counting seconds instead of sentences. "They use the forest," he said quietly. "Not just this one. Dozens like it. Roads nobody questions. Places people assume are empty." Jack listened, his body still, his breathing shallow. The rope around his wrists burned, but he ignored it. Pain was familiar. Confusion was not. "They move people through here," Tom continued. "In vans, in trucks, sometimes on foot. They don't keep them long, just long enough to pass them on." "To who?" Jack asked. Tom's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. Once someone disappears into that chain, they don't come back the same, if they come back at all." Jack's mind replayed the abandoned SUV he'd seen earlier, the way it had sat crooked at the edge of the road. Engine, cold, doors locked, like it had been placed there deliberately. He remembered the boot prints leading into the trees, deep and fresh, with no sign of return. At the time, it had looked careless. Now he understood it was intentional. "They wanted you to stop," Tom said, reading his silence. "They needed a uniformed presence nearby, someone predictable." Jack exhaled slowly. "So, I was bait." Tom nodded once. "They hit you hard enough to scramble your memory, tied you up, and planned to torch the truck. A clean story. Solo driver. Wrong place, wrong time." Rex, still rigid in the back seat, shifted his weight slightly. His ears twitched, then locked forward again. His entire body stiffened, not in aggression, but in absolute focus. It was a posture Jack had only seen once before during a joint operation overseas, when a K-9 had detected something humans couldn't yet smell or hear. Tom noticed immediately. His hand froze mid-motion. "That's not a person," he murmured. "That's not movement." Jack felt the temperature inside the truck drop, though the engine was off and the night unchanged. "What is it?" Rex didn't growl. He didn't bark. He went completely still, tail low, spine straight, eyes fixed on the floor beneath the front seats. It was the kind of alert that didn't ask for confirmation. Tom's voice hardened. "Explosives." Jack's stomach clenched. The word carried weight, purpose, finality. Tom leaned down, pressing his ear closer to the metal floor. A faint sound followed, a soft, deliberate click, barely audible, like a watch being wound somewhere beneath the truck. "Pressure trigger," Tom whispered. "Or motion-based, hard to tell without looking." "If I'd tried to drive," Jack said quietly. "You wouldn't have made it 10 feet, Tom replied. "They wanted you gone, but they also wanted to be sure." Jack closed his eyes for half a second, not in fear, but in understanding. This wasn't reckless violence. This was procedure. These men weren't criminals learning as they went. They were professionals who had simply chosen a different side of the law. Tom continued, lowering his voice even further. "The reason nobody stops them is because they don't act like a gang. They act like a unit. Ranks, roles, discipline." Rex shifted again, placing one paw slightly forward, nose hovering inches above the floor. His breathing slowed, controlled, as if he were counting something only he could perceive. Tom glanced at Jack. Rex was trained to detect explosives during his last deployment. He's slower now, older, but he doesn't miss. Jack studied the dog more closely. Up close, Rex's age showed in the stiffness of his joints and the gray creeping along his muzzle, but his eyes remained sharp, unclouded. This was an animal that had seen chaos and learned how to remain steady inside it. "There's something else," Tom said. "They didn't expect me." Jack frowned. "Why not?" "Because I'm not supposed to exist to them," Tom replied. "I stopped being useful when I stopped following orders." He explained that the men running the route had once been part of larger operations, overseas deployments, black sites, missions that never officially happened. When the wars ended, some adapted, others didn't. A few learned how to repurpose what they knew. "They're protected," Tom said. "Not officially, not on paper, but enough that when someone asks the wrong questions, the questions disappear." Jack thought of Sarah again, of the way Tom's voice had faltered when he'd said her name. He understood now that this wasn't just about revenge, it was about unfinished duty. Outside, a shadow passed close to the front of the truck, slow and deliberate. Rex's gaze tracked it without moving his head. Tom inhaled once, steadying himself. "We don't have much time. When they realize the truck didn't go up on schedule, they'll check it themselves," Jack nodded. "Then we move before they do." Tom's eyes met his. For the first time since Jack had woken up, there was something like agreement there. "When I cut you loose, you don't stand. You don't speak. You wait for Rex." Rex's tail flicked once, subtle and precise. The truth had surfaced now, ugly and unavoidable. Jack hadn't just crossed paths with the wrong people. He'd stepped into a system designed to erase him. And somewhere beneath the truck, the bomb waited, patient and silent. Tom drew the knife with the economy of motion that came from long practice. The blade small, dark, and already angled where it needed to be. He sliced through the rope at Jack's wrists without looking at him, eyes still fixed on the fogged windshield, listening for the rhythm of steps outside. "Don't move," he breathed, not as a command but a promise that movement at the wrong second would be answered. Jack felt the pressure release and blood surge back into his hands. Pins and needles flaring as sensation returned. He forced himself to stay still, jaw clenched, breath shallow. Rex had already lowered himself until his chest nearly brushed the floor, the shepherd's body elongated and quiet, head forward, eyes tracking the shadow that drifted past the driver's window. The man outside paused, a tall figure wrapped in a dark parka, face hidden by a knit cap pulled low. When he crouched to peer under the truck, Jack caught a glimpse of a heavy beard braided with frost and a soul. Jawline cut sharp as a blade, someone built hard by years of cold work. Someone who moved with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. Rex's tail flicked once, precise, a signal too small for anyone else to notice. "Now," Tom whispered. Jack slid sideways, careful not to brush the seat, and eased toward the rear door as Tom cracked it just enough to let night spill in. Cold slapped Jack's cheek and steadied him. He went low immediately, belly to dirt, letting the forest take him the way it had taken soldiers before him. Rex flowed ahead, silent, choosing ground that swallowed sound. Wet leaves, moss, the soft decay of fallen needles. His age showed only in the deliberate way he placed each paw, strength conserved, balance perfect. They moved as a single line into the brush, Tom last, knife gone, hand ready to pull Jack flat if needed. 10 yards in, Rex halted and drove his nose hard into Tom's shin, a blunt, urgent shove that carried weight and history. "Down!" Tom hissed. They dropped together, Jack's cheek pressed into earth that smelled of iron and rain. The world held its breath. Then the night tore open. The explosion came not as a bang, but as a ripping roar that lifted the truck on its springs and slammed it back into itself. Metal screamed as it twisted. Glass burst outward in a glittering spray. Heat washed over them in a sudden wall, the shockwave rolling through the trees and knocking loose a rain of needles and bark. Fire bloomed, greedy and bright, painting trunks in orange and throwing long shadows that leaped and broke. Jack's chest seized as he watched the place he had woken die in a heartbeat. "That was for me," he said, the words shaking loose before he could stop them. Tom didn't look away from the flames. "For you," he agreed, voice flat, "and for anyone who kept asking." Rex lifted his head and looked back at Jack, eyes clear, assessing. There was no fear there, only confirmation that the sequence had played out as expected. A curse snapped from the road, sharp and frustrated, followed by another voice answering from deeper in the trees. Shapes scattered with practiced efficiency, one circling wide, another angling toward the fire to confirm the kill that hadn't happened. Tom waited, counting silently, then tugged Jack backward by the collar and guided him farther downslope where the ground dipped and the brush thickened. They moved again, slower now, letting chaos pull attention away. Jack noticed the way Tom favored his left knee on the slope, a faint hitch that hinted at an old injury earned and never fully healed. It explained the careful pacing, the refusal to rush even when adrenaline begged for speed. Rex kept to Tom's right, guarding that weakness without instruction, the partnership written into their spacing. A new voice cut through the crackle of burning fuel, calm, clipped, carrying authority. The speaker stepped briefly into the firelight, a man in his 40s, with a close-cropped haircut, lean and angular, eyes cold and evaluating, posture upright despite the uneven ground. He scanned the wreck with soldierly efficiency, jaw tightening when he saw the blast pattern instead of the body he expected. This was a man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. Control lived in his spine. Tom's hand tightened on Jack's sleeve. "That's the one who keeps them organized," he whispered. "Calls himself Mason." They eased back another few yards, then stopped as the fire settled into a steady burn, and the men near it argued in low tones. Mason turned once, gaze sweeping the tree line, and Jack felt the strange sensation of being weighed by eyes that had never seen him. Rex remained still, breathing slow, fur dusted with drifting ash. When Mason finally gestured and the others peeled off to search, Tom leaned close. "We don't run," he said. "We let them chase the wrong ghosts." Jack nodded as the truth settled in, with the aftershock. Survival here wasn't speed, it was patience. They waited until the searchlines thinned and the fire lost its voice, then slipped farther into the dark, the forest closing behind them as if nothing had happened at all. Dawn came cautiously, as if the forest itself needed proof that the night was finished. The fire had burned down to a skeletal glow by the time the first engines arrived, their lights cutting through drifting smoke and hanging fog. What remained of the truck was a blackened frame sunk into soft earth, metal curled inward like a thing that had tried to protect its heart and failed. Around it, the ground told the truth in fragments, boot prints pressed deep and purposeful, then scattered, then gone. Jack Miller sat on the tailgate of a county rescue vehicle with a blanket draped over his shoulders. The wool scratched his neck, but he welcomed the sensation. It anchored him. His hands still shook faintly, the afterimage of adrenaline refusing to let go. Dirt streaked his knuckles, and a shallow cut on his cheek had already begun to sting as warmth returned. He looked older in the morning light, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, the gray in his hair less forgiving. Yet there was a steadiness in him now, a posture reclaimed, as if some internal alignment had been restored by surviving what was meant to erase him. Rex pressed against Jack's leg, a solid, reassuring weight. In daylight, the German Shepherd's age was clearer, the graying muzzle, the slight stiffness when he shifted, but so was his dignity. His coat was thick and weathered, sable fading to ash at the edges, and his eyes held a calm vigilance that didn't fade when the danger did. He leaned into Jack with quiet insistence, grounding him without demand. Jack rested a hand on the dog's shoulder and felt the warmth push back against the cold that still lingered in his bones. Tom Walker stood a few steps away, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, watching responders move through the perimeter. He looked thinner in the light, the angles of his face sharper, the old knee injury more apparent in the way he favored one leg when he turned. His beard, streaked with gray, caught the ash, drifting on the breeze. Tom didn't speak unless spoken to. He never had, not since the night Sarah disappeared. Loss had carved patience into him and left a reluctance to accept attention. He knelt briefly to check Rex's paws, brushing away grit with practiced care, then rose again, content to remain peripheral. A woman approached, brisk and composed, wearing a sheriff's jacket over a thermal shirt. Deputy Elena Brooks was in her early 30s, tall and athletic, with dark hair pulled into a tight braid that fell between her shoulders. Her skin was olive-toned, her face open but firm, and her eyes missed little. She carried herself with a measured authority that came from competence rather than rank. Years earlier, a rollover accident had taken her partner on a mountain road. Since then, she had learned to keep her voice steady in places where chaos liked to hide. "Mr. Miller," she said, stopping at a respectful distance. "I'm Deputy Brooks. We're glad you're alive." She glanced at the wreckage, then at Tom and Rex. "We've got footprints heading north and east, but they break up fast. Whoever did this knew how to scatter." Jack met her gaze. "They weren't amateurs." "No," she agreed, and made a note. "Your statement will matter." Jack pulled the blanket tighter and spoke clearly, choosing precision over drama. He explained what he could without embellishment, the timing, the signals, the explosion. When he finished, he gestured toward Tom and Rex. "They saved my life." Brooks turned to Tom. "Sir?" Tom shook his head slightly, as if declining a compliment he hadn't asked for. He reached down and rested his hand on Rex's head, fingers moving through fur with a familiarity that spoke of years, not moments. "He doesn't leave anyone behind," Tom said. It wasn't pride, it was fact. Rex lifted his head at the sound of Tom's voice and then leaned back into Jack, tail low, content. Jack looked into the dog's eyes and felt something settle that he hadn't known was loose. He remembered men he'd served with, some buried, some broken, some still searching for the edge where duty ended and life began. He realized that survival wasn't the loud victory people imagined. Sometimes it was a quiet alignment, a reminder of why training existed in the first place. Another vehicle pulled in at the edge of the clearing, unmarked, clean. A man stepped out. Special Agent Daniel Crow, mid-40s, tall, clean-shaven, with steel gray hair cut close and a posture that never slouched. His suit was practical rather than sharp, boots scuffed enough to suggest he used them. His eyes were cool and observant, the kind that cataloged before judging. He spoke with Deputy Brooks briefly, nodding once toward the scene, then approached Jack. "Agent Crow," he said, extending a hand. "We'll take it from here." His tone was polite, his grip firm, his interest unmistakable. He glanced at the burn pattern, the scattered tracks, then at Tom and Rex. "You were fortunate." Jack considered the word. Fortunate implied chance. This hadn't been chance. "Prepared," Jack replied. Crow's eyebrow lifted a fraction, then settled. As the morning unfolded, the forest gave back its quiet inch by inch. The engines idled down, tape went up, questions were logged. Tom remained at the edge of it all, refusing center stage. When Brooks returned to tell Jack he could leave, he stood slowly, testing his balance, then nodded. Before parting, Jack faced Tom. "You didn't have to stay." Tom met his eyes, something like relief flickering there. "Yes," he said softly. "I did." Jack crouched and looked at Rex, letting his voice drop. "Thank you." Rex accepted the gratitude without ceremony, leaning forward until his forehead brushed Jack's knee. As they separated, Jack felt the truth of it settle fully at last. Some battles didn't end with discharge papers, and some heroes never waited for medals. They stood watch, long after the fire went out, ensuring that what remained was enough. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes they come quietly, through a warning instinct, a loyal companion, a stranger who refuses to walk away, or a moment where silence saves a life. Jack survived not because of luck, but because someone chose to stay alert when it would have been easier to leave, and because a dog listened to a signal that humans could not hear. In moments like that, many would say it was coincidence, but others recognize it for what it truly is, a small, deliberate act of grace. The Bible tells us that God often works in whispers, not storms. He places protection in unexpected forms and sends help long before we know we need it. A delayed step, a sudden warning, a presence that keeps watch when the night feels too heavy. In our own lives, we may never face a burning truck or a forest ambush, but we face quieter dangers every day: discouragement, loneliness, fear, and moments where giving up feels easier than holding on. And yet, again and again, we are spared, guided, or comforted in ways we only understand later. If this story touched you, let it be a reminder. You may be protected right now by something you cannot see. You may be carried by prayers you never heard spoken. And you may one day be the quiet miracle in someone else's life. If you believe that God still works through ordinary people, loyal hearts, and unseen moments, please share this story so it can reach someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. And subscribe to the channel to continue supporting stories of courage, faith, and quiet justice. May God watch over you and your loved ones. May He guide your steps, protect your nights, and place the right people and the right moments on your path. And may you never walk alone, even when the road feels dark.